Today in Hawaii, sex trafficking victims could literally be your own daughter or teen girl you care about. Sex trafficking is not new in Hawaii. One of the first documented cases took place in 1825 when European whalers trafficked native Hawaiian girls. To this day, 6 out of 10 sex trafficking victims have native Hawaiian ancestry. Sex trafficking has moved from ports of entry into our schools and public places. In today's world, recruiters are often classmates, peers, or online friends. This travesty needs to stop, and prevention is key. Welcome to our online first event. I'm thrilled that you have chosen to invest time to educate yourself so you can help protect and empower the teen girls in your life and community. In this first session, join me in this interview with survivor and frontliner Tammy Bitanga, who is now also a powerful advocate for other survivors. Open your heart and mind to her compelling story and the hope and power behind a transformed, healed life. Oh, welcome everyone. I am so excited. We are in for a great treat today. And I want to introduce to you a dear friend of mine. So Tammy Bitanga is part of a team of Ho'olanapua, a great organization that helps to serve victims of sex trafficking, but they also work with at-risk youth in the area of prevention and so much more. Tammy offers insight and expertise and can speak with authority because she herself is a survivor of childhood sexual exploitation. She has many key roles, but she also serves as a volunteer coordinator at Pearl Haven, a Ho'olanapua specialized residential treatment campus. And I'm so honored to have Tammy here, and I love her heart, and you will love her heart and her passion to really help all of us here today. So welcome, Tammy.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Well, Tammy, we're just going to jump into the first question because I just really appreciate the wisdom and the insight that you have. So first of all, maybe you can just share with us a little bit, how did you get recruited into sex trafficking in your life?
Okay, well, my story starts out like I was very early in my childhood. I had a lot of detachment. So like my mom gave me to my dad, who was actually my Hanai dad. And so then I went and lived like a lot of different places all the way up until 6 years old. Then my dad got married to then it was like my stepmom, but then in Hawaii, we don't say that, right? It's like Hanai family, right? Mm-hmm. So I didn't actually know that my dad wasn't really my bio dad. Mm-hmm. And then there was a lot of sexual exploitation, a lot of abuse physically, mentally, which left me vulnerable. And I went into foster care at a young age, at 13. At 13, I, began... I think I even began using drugs a lot earlier than that, kind of to numb out, but that led me down to a party life. And at 15, I was recruited by a pimp in Waikiki. And I guess for me, it's when I look back on that time and when I really do my homework and understand like all of the vulnerabilities, when I did my ACEs, I have 10 ACEs. And so that left me vulnerable in that time of my young life at 15 years old. And really, we talked about earlier too, about like how to have love and acceptance, right? And so I just really wanted to be accepted. I really wanted to be loved. And he wasn't the scary guy in the van. He was like a very hot, cute guy that rolled up on me on a moped in Waikiki as I was partying with my girlfriends. And he really boyfriended me, and that's what we say, that it's like a boyfriend that brings you into the world and the game of sex trafficking. And during that time in the 70s, we didn't call it sex trafficking. So it really took me a long time to realize that I was actually a victim.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing the courage, to just share a little bit about your story. And, every story is powerful and redemptive. You have a powerful story of healing and restoration. And I just want to say that every story is different. And so, Tammy, can you tell us some ways, that youth are coerced into sex trafficking?
Sure. I mean, nowadays, back in my days, we didn't have social media. So social media platforms of all sorts are used to recruit and to friend girls and boys and young people into this crazy life we call sex trafficking and exploitation. So that, and just like for me, a boyfriend can tell you you're part of the team and you just got to do this one thing so we can get ahead. And there's just other ways. I mean, sometimes we see familial trafficking in Hawaii, and it's just, do this for the family. So, there's a lot of ways that children are exploited in Hawaii.
There's so many, right? I mean, even friends, peers,
Yeah, peer recruitment is a big deal. Like they invite you to a party and you go to the party and all of a sudden you don't know where you're waking up because somebody put something in your drink. Or there's just a lot of ways for that coercion to happen.
Right. So yeah, just for us to be aware, right? I mean, there's so many different ways and we need to be aware and educate ourselves on all of this. So Tammy, what are some various age ranges of victims, in Hawaii or just really anywhere? What would you say to that?
I say that our children today, because of social media and because of just the way that that recruiters are out there and traffickers are out there, it's any age. We see children being exploited at very young ages. And I also have clients that I work with that are much older. So I think there is no really one age group that is being exploited.
Wow, so that's an eye-opening fact as well, that sometimes we think, oh, it's just children or it's just teenagers, but it could be grown adults. It could be really, there's, like you said, there's all kinds of situations, right? And it kind of leads into my next question, which is, what is the largest demographic of victims that, in your opinion, you have observed? Yeah.
So I don't like that. I don't like stats. I don't like feeding stats. I know that donors and service providers and, people that fund programs and stuff, they like to know like what the demographics are, what the stats are. I, as a personally have gone through, I was missed. Nobody really was like, oh, focus on the sex trafficked kids that are in foster care. Focus on the sex trafficked kids that, have high ACEs. So I don't like that. I would like for people to be aware that all children, all humans can be vulnerable. So we have to build these protective factors into our communities and into our villages and into our families.
And that is such a good point you have, so I want us all to, as Tammy is sharing, we can have some mind shifts on how our perspectives, on these things. Because like you said, there's no demographic. I mean, it depends, right, on the place, at the time, just the season. So really, that's a great answer. What type of men are purchasing sex?
So when we think about a buyer, I mean, when you think about that, you think about, okay, well, not all people are going to buy sex, right? Let's just change that conversation and go, oh, what kind of guy or what kind of woman is attracted to this kind of other person, right? So when you think about it, that's huge, right? Oh, some guys like this kind of girl, some guys like that kind of girl, some, it's so varied across. And so we also have to realize that not all buyers are men.
That's true.
Yeah.
Sometimes we assume that.
And so you got to realize not all traffickers are men either. So we have to take this to the next level of humans abusing humans. And not put buyers and traffickers in a box. Because victims are also not in a box.
That's so
true. It's supply and demand, right? What is the demand? Who's the supplier? And if we can start looking at it in that way, it's going to change the way that we serve people.
Wow. And that makes me think, too, of how traffickers may focus on areas where there's a concentration of buyers, right? Maybe, I think you were mentioning earlier, conventions or different things like that. Can you?
Yeah. So if you have a high concentration, because historically we understand and we know that men are the primary buyers, right? I mean, it's really through, through studies, through research. But we also have to not minimize it and say only men. Yeah, because there are women that are buying, there are couples that are requesting. So if we can broaden that, but if we look at it in a way where if there's a high concentration of men in one area, and for Hawaii, tourism, military, conventions, we do have high concentrations of men during certain times of the year, or certain areas. And so then the trafficker is going to be knowledgeable of that, and they're going to like really up their game and bring in the supply. So again, supply and demand.
Wow, that's really good to know too, and just to be aware, that's such a great insight. Could a victim literally be our own daughter, like my own daughter, or a granddaughter, or a niece, or a neighbor? Could it really touch us as close as that?
Yeah, so I always like to bring it home in that way, is that I'm a daughter, I'm a niece, I'm a friend, I'm a sister, and I was trafficked. So it was very much part of my journey and part of the reason why I began to share publicly, because who wants to talk about the worst day, the worst week, the worst months, the worst years of your life? Whoever wants to share that, it's not something that I signed up for, right? But I found it necessary that people understand this is a face of somebody who has been trafficked. It didn't end in my trafficking experience. Yeah. It ended when I got free. Yeah, it ended when I got free. And if it ended for me that I was victimized and, abused, the freedom came when I was able to voice there is healing, there is a change, there is a way out. And I don't want the youth of Hawaii to think that it ended when they got trafficked. I want them to understand that there's healing for them and there's freedom. And so that propels me to continue the conversation. And I'm so grateful for you and Explicit Movement that makes a platform for survivors to come back and say, it's not over once you've been trafficked.
That's so true. There's so much hope, right? And I'm just emotional just for myself, just thinking about what you just shared. Like, these are lives we're talking about, right? And
we're not stats.
Yeah, exactly.
We're humans.
Right, the human side of this, right, that we want to make sure we are focusing on, and just your heart, Tammy, to have the courage as a powerful woman here in Hawaii. Blessed to know you, just to know that your heart to really care and love people and want to see people protected as much as possible and thriving and healed and free, right? And so thank you so much for that. Now, you mentioned about this, the term ACEs throughout our conversation so far. And I was wondering if you could just share with our audience a little bit of an understanding, because this is a really great insight or knowledge for all of us to know about ACEs. In fact, you as listeners here who are watching might even consider looking at what ACEs you have, and that might give you some insight into your own life and to get healing and wholeness for yourself too. But what are ACEs?
So they're adverse childhood. I can't remember the whole thing.
Right.
But I would say
experiences. Yes.
I would say that if you don't know what your ACEs are and you don't understand what ACEs are, I would say Google it and take the test, because a lot of times you can, that's something that we use to measure like vulnerabilities. And when you realize like these things happen to you in your childhood and you carry those hurts and harms and traumas into your adult life, and your reactions to certain things are due to your ACEs. So get healed from your ACEs so that you can move forward.
Yes, and ACEs, ACE is an acronym, ACES, and it's a great, because it is highly researched, highly scientifically researched study, and so it's very credible. And it basically covers, I think, 10 different traumas that a person could go through. There's probably more, but they kind of focus on 10 basic ones. And if you have, I think it was if you have 4 or more, something like that, you can do your research, that you can be more prone to even physical diseases and health problems later on in life. And so you really want to get healed and pursue your own healing for these things. But is a very helpful, reference point, right, for ACEs. Okay, so going on, we're almost done here. Are Christian girls or youth groups vulnerable to being trafficked?
I would say that all youth are vulnerable. But one of the things that I notice, I would say in the Christian community is that sometimes we just think that our children are protected because we just live in this certain bubble, this protective bubble. And yes, of course, we want to make sure that we are protecting our children, and we do maybe do a better job or a job. I'm not sure how to say that, that, we don't allow our children to venture into these particular areas of the world. But at that same time, is like we don't also talk the talk and have those conversations about what is sex abuse, what is sexual exploitation, what makes our children vulnerable. Say, for instance, if a child has had some sexual abuse in their history, oftentimes it's so taboo because we put such a high mark on purity that we don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. Like, what daughter or what son wants to come tell their parents that they have been sexually assaulted? And therefore that leaves that unhealed or unaddressed. I think healing takes a long time, and I don't want to use that word lightly. But just even addressing the trauma that comes from sexual assault, and then it just is that open wound that never gets addressed. And so if we as, parents and caregivers can start having those conversations and talk about, like, if this happens, this is a safe space to come and talk about it. I think opening those conversations, also healthy relationships and healthy boundaries, if we can teach our children what does that look like. Just open that conversation up, because oftentimes the media, sometimes even like celebrities, they're not actually exhibiting healthy relationships. They glamorize a lot of stuff that's not healthy. And so if we can begin having those conversations with our children, this is healthy.
Yes, and I think with even in whether you're in church or not, the issue of shame, really can prevent us from voicing if we've been sexually abused in some way. And I just want to mention too that sometimes I used to tend to think before that it's adults abusing children or teenagers. But actually in this day and age, it could be older children abusing younger children, or teens, older teens abusing, or peers even. Sometimes at a sleepover, things can happen. So really we're talking about sexual abuse is really rampant in our society today. And there is a high correlation, right, between when many victims who have been sex trafficked a high percentage have had sex abuse in some form in the past. So it does make a person more vulnerable. And so even in the Christian community, we need to have these conversations. Every family.
And I think too, what I like to always make sure to point out when we're, having these conversations is that, we don't say to children that have been victimized, why you act like that? What's the matter with you? Why what is that? It's more of, what happened to you? Let's be more trauma informed, and what happened to you that would cause this behavior, right? Let's address what is the cause of the behavior instead of why you gotta act like that. Yeah.
Right. No, that's so good. The root of it, right? And just be that safe place to share. That's so good. And in your experience, this is a common question that people have asked me too, who are the most at-risk girls?
I hate that question.
Yeah.
It's all,
Right. So we need to dispel.
Yeah. Dispel the myth of it's those girls.
Right.
I wasn't those girls. I was pretty, I did have some, sexual abuse in my history. And we do find that many of our youth have sexual abuse in their history that are being trafficked or are at high risk for being trafficked. So we could say that. But then that would eliminate the girls that don't have, or the boys that don't have sexual abuse in their history.
Right.
So I want to say we just have to take a look at every youth and just make it a safe space for us to have conversations, and prevention is key. Those preventive conversations.
Yes. So good, Tammy. Well said. What are some tips for parents? This is a practical part. Like, what are some tips for parents, family members, to recognize if their child is possibly being groomed by sex traffickers? What can they do also to prevent, or what are some tips that you would give them?
I would say know where your children are.
Yes.
Know what they're doing. Know who their friends are. Check on their social media. No more secrets. In the dark is where all the kind crazy happens. So keep it in the light. You just have those relationships with your children that it's a safe place. Like, believe your children when they're saying, I don't like when so-and-so comes over. I don't like when they look at me like that. I don't like when they touch me like that. Like, make sure you are the safe space for your child.
That's good. And listen, like, really listen to them. Yeah, that's
Believe
so good.
them.
They
have gut instinct as well. We're all humans have that.
Right.
God gave us that.
That's
for
so
a reason.
Good. Yes. And like what you said, stay connected. And some of us, honestly, the teen years can be, if you have a teenager, can be challenging in some situations, right? In some families. And so if you need help in learning how to connect with your child, I just want to encourage you to pursue growing yourself as a parent, because it's never too late. And we want to continue to grow as a parent in that heart connection, emotional connection, right? And that goes a long way. And a couple more questions. Are boys and even young men being sex trafficked in our societies today?
Yeah, I would say across the nation, we're finding more and more that men, I do go on some national platforms where I do get to hear from men that have survived sex trafficking. And, a lot of times they don't identify because it's so focused on girls and it's so focused on youth. And when you really unpack it and you talk to people who have had sexual abuse in their history, or somehow some dream is unlocked of theirs and they figure out, like, this is what happened to me, then you find that men are also sex trafficked and boys have been sex trafficked. So we just have to remember and keep in mind that it's a human thing. It's humans doing terrible things to other humans.
Yes, that's so true. And I may be incorrect, so don't quote me on this, but I was reading just some statistics, and sometimes, like you said, Tammy, you can't even really trust all the statistics either, because there's so much that's unreported, right? But just in general, what I've read, which may or may not be true, but upwards to 40%, they say globally, of trafficked victims could be boys, or are boys, or could be boys. So I guess what we're saying is that it could be both, so that's the main point, is that boys and young men can be as well. So our last question, Tammy, just to leave on a kind of a positive, helpful note here, what are just a few practical tips for teen girls to do to protect themselves from being coerced into sex trafficking? I know there's a lot, but maybe just some pointers to think about to start with.
It's like such a big conversation. Prevention is key.
I know, it's so much you can have a whole workshop on prevention. Okay, so
so I think that prevention is key. Having conversation, being open, listening, believing, empowering your youth to have self-identity, just to know who they are. Boundaries, being accepted, looking, like, where are you looking for those healthy relationships? I think that is where we start. And, Ho'olanapua does have webinars that we put on weekly. So just education and prevention is key. If your child is at risk, then we would say to really bring forward the idea that mentoring is key in having that a healthy adult in your life that you can, that is on your corner, that you can rely on, that you can talk to.
They don't feel alone.
Yeah.
Right?
So we at Hole in a Pua do have a mentoring program. We have a whole that's a whole nother conversation, but I did want to highlight that we do have a mentoring program. But if you tune in to our webinars weekly, we share a lot of the other services that Hole in a Pua can provide.
Tammy, I know that we're talking about, you know, different demographics, and you said really everybody is vulnerable, but there's also like the LGBTQ, you know, the whole transgender community. Can you elaborate on? They can also be, you know, victims as well.
Yeah, so they have different vulnerabilities, and a lot of that has to do with acceptance and about, you know, sometimes family doesn't accept, you know, them, and so then they become vulnerable. They leave home if they're a minor, they get out on the streets, and then it's a matter of, you know, how do I make it out here? And then, you know, traffickers and buyers, exploiters are always looking, right? And so that they become vulnerable to that. So yeah, we do see a lot of our transgender youth and our LGBTQ plus children, youth that are being exploited. So we always want to make sure that we're inclusive and service providers are inclusive and make sure that there are services being provided for that population.
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. You know, bottom line, we all have a need to be loved and have a sense of value. And when any child, right, or even adult has a lack in that and doesn't feel like they're valuable, they're seeking for love and acceptance, that already makes them that much more vulnerable. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, folks, there's this great organizations like Hole in a Pua, and we'll share some more resources coming up, you know, that you can tap into. Thank God, you know, that more resources are being more available over the years, and so this is a great season to educate yourself on all of this. Thank you so much, Tammy, for your time and for just giving your experience, your insights into this whole big topic of sex trafficking. And I know I learned a lot from you, and I look forward to just continuing to grow myself, you know, and helping others around me as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. I hope that this interview with Tammy was helpful to you. If you are like me, you may be feeling an urgency to want to do something to protect the girls in your family and community. Remember, Tammy mentioned victimization can literally happen to anyone, especially during the vulnerable teenage years. You won't want to miss the next session. Join us next time for a powerful interview with a frontliner who works with victims directly and gain ways to protect your teen girls from sex trafficking. See you soon.